ABBA 2. October 27, 2018. ABBA, in the heart of each. Install us first in the infinite host of life. Silence. Beloved, we are going to continue our discussions. Who wants to speak? Whisper. Beloved, there is no speaking? Yes. Yes, yes. Participant, it is rather a testimony. It's always the night with me, it's true. There are moments of great ecstasy. And what is surprising, as it happens, is that at some point, I feel obviously a lot of love, at chest level, and when it gets hard, all chest heaves, as if I know, I was going to fly away somewhere. So it always surprises me, because I do not know where it can go, how far it can go. Here. But it happens from time to time and, beloved, it will go to the end and after the end. Laughter. What you describe, before letting you continue to give a landmark of course for those who see and feel the vibration, energy, and consciousness through their body and through these perceptions, of course you that have understood all perceived process results in changes in the rib cage. What you describe more specifically, is directly related to the lighting of the crown lifting of the heart, in relation located Merkaba, I'll remind you, in the sacred lemniscate, from the lowest point of the new body, until at top of the head. So you confirm this by experience and by your question of how far it could go, I tell you, it can only go climbing in its final phase. The ecstasy experienced the night or at any time whatsoever, which accompanies these vibratory process reflects you, beyond joy, ecstasy and bliss experienced, shows you and gives you live the process of the lifting ring of the heart which mixes its vibration and frequency with interdimensional Merkaba. There is no question here of the structure of eternity or otherwise known body of eternity, or even an energy interface, but directly to the collection and transfer your consciousness within this interdimensional Merkaba collectively, signing by the same token, for you, as for countless brothers and sisters, their willingness and readiness to experience the event. From the moment you in and beyond the perception of the chest, are experienced even that ephemeral way of ecstatic states occurring as you say, in your case, in sleep, or independently any projection will of consciousness or perception of vibration, it simply reflects that you have come to what I would call your time zero. I also remind you that the zero time must be collective. The set of temporal, spatial, and dimensional frames are resolved into each heart. This also means that all preparations for firing are actually engaged. However, the final and irremediable actuation of the lifting ring of heart with personal interdimensional Merkaba not realize that collective moment. However, learning and experience of the ecstasy and the intimate mechanism of individual ascension process is ready, in you. How far it will go, until the disappearance of any form, to become the life, the way, and the truth. This is now. You can define purpose, you can define what is the end, if not in live testimony, that is to say become ecstasy and the bliss that do not depend on your person, or this world, nor any history or of any creation. Here is the ultimate goal, which nothing can be said, and all of which can be experienced. What you describe is exactly this process. The firing of Merkaba personal rather than collective interdimensional, is realized through the sacred lemniscate which, as I said, part of the eighth body, the tip of the sternum, and joined vertically lemniscate plot to above the top of the head on which was appointed here a long time on the 13th or Veira body or crystal fountain. The firing of personal interdimensional Merkaba is translated by the activation of the two crowns of the head, crystal fountain, otherwise called the 13th body, at the heart center. The heart center becomes both the heart of the heart, the crossing point, place of birth and place of ascension. The light of the physiology process is identical in each. Some brothers who are on slightly staggered timelines, this can translate just not by ecstasy or bliss, but by peace and serenity unusual because not experienced until now, and regardless of the state of your life, regardless of the state of your mind or your concerns. This is the lighting of the collective interdimensional Merkaba, conducted last few days, too, that reports of individual ascension process that many of you begin to live and whose best testimony to the collective moment is a entry into ecstasy and bliss, independent of any will, grabbing you, lovely you, ecstatic or night, or the punch, irrespective of any desire or any personal will to achieve this. This is typically the result of sacrifice. Although, of course, as you say, there may still be within the person, a form of questioning of how far this will go. This will go to the Omega. And this is actually rooted and officially recorded, and manifested in many siblings. It is precisely this that brings you the proof, even if you do not live up to this current one, the process that opened here a few days. So I thank you for having dared to speak, to have testified to this experience. The lifting ring, crystal fountain, Marian channel are all gathered at the heart of the heart. In the same way that all of creation is in your chest, all dimensions, the history of the creation myth. Regaining this, you are freed from identification with any world whatsoever, from identification to any line at any origin or any destination that is. The only destination, the end, as you appointed, is the perpetual joy and ecstasy of permanent bliss that nothing disturbs. Here is your home, beyond the many mansions, there is the home of all the fragmented consciousness. Each of you is both totality and fragment at all. Each of you has within him the totality of all the creations and the totality of all the worlds. You are therefore really a hologram species, located in multidimensional state, which had been divided, fragmented, and locked, and that you find today at the end of this story. Bliss in itself does not mean a purpose, but it is the translation of this process. This is more of a beatitude than ecstasy. Ecstasy has its reverse side priori called intasy. Bliss is the reunification of intasy and ecstasy, or if you prefer, to another level of being and non-being, in the same experience, beyond the worlds. This is what happens in you, as you have already found or soon will notice. This process, while being irregular and inconstant, will take more and more intensity and space. And it is incurable and inevitable for everyone. Even if today you have countless brothers and sisters who perceive moments of peace and serenity, that they cannot be confused with peace and serenity for which you fought, for which you have worked, but reveal the spontaneity of who you are beyond form. Bliss, depending on how the remaining time, as I have said, cannot be known in his time, since there is a fit and adjustment of all the collective consciousness of the earth on your consciousness resonates to what takes place in each of you, but of course in the heavens. Whether in this solar system, and you guessed it, in all creations, in a multiverse whatsoever. Bliss is therefore both sides of ecstasy, which is called ecstasy, and intasy. Bliss, which is much different and much of joy, is a stunning state of consciousness. This stunning consciousness is not a consciousness, but the bewilderment of consciousness gives you to live through that person and through the illusion of this world. What bliss, as the could you express some stars, here for many years. Whether Gemma Galgani, the star unit, whether Ananda Mai Ma, the star G and many other sisters who, in their words, you have described not only ecstasy, but this bliss. I can only refer you to a very specific teaching you have been given several years ago by Hildegard of Bingen, concerning the abandonment and sacrifice, and what had been developed at the time, the tension towards abandonment. Today, the tension towards the abandonment is not the result of a character or strength of mind, but directly to the influence of the Christ matrix. This matrix Christ, to work for many months, solved within this world a number of elements locking nuts, a number of ralentissance elements related to what we called the behaviors, habits. So each of you, he has the perception or not, at least, I have told you, a feeling of peace and serenity, occurring randomly in any case for no reason. At the other end, the total bliss with all stages of joy or ecstasy, or ecstasy between the two. This sign, beyond doubt, by lighting the personal interdimensional Merkaba and the rotation of the inner suburbs and the outer suburbs of the head synchronously with the upward crown of the heart, by the fiery light leads you this bliss. Or if you prefer, this consuming ecstasy, of course, consume, collective time, which was called at the time grid planet by the white paradise, this flash of light, coming from the sun and cosmos that will be the signal for the entire human collective, the time has come. This moment is being formally installed. He follows his rhythm. You have no way individually to act on this process. You can only accept, acquiesce, and cross, which can still be illuminated at any level of your personal history. From the moment you acquiesce to what is seen and experienced, whatever the difficulties, we told you that behind there was joy, we say to you now that behind there is bliss. This bliss is independent of any circumstance, any world, of all history and of every person. It is not just the joy, that joy be external or internal, but it is a much broader process. Just like what you have narrated some stars having lived these processes, you can imagine that the radiation of a star of the day or of yourselves today, obviously a contagious effect at Dela of joy, beyond the absorption of species. Because the irradiation of light occurring at the bliss instantly covers the entire earth. I said instantly covers the entire earth information of intelligence of the light, as to its purpose, as to his beatitude. And so therefore, there is a cumulative effect of both, multiplying, which means that as soon as a sufficient number of brothers and sisters among the enlightened among the released, or among those who live there, no matter, once we have reached a quota that I cannot define, then everything will change extremely quickly, in the space of a few days or a few hours. For now, you have simply if it falls on you, so to speak, to benefit from the effects of this beatitude, in you, but also on the entire planet. This is not a figment of the imagination. This is the absolute truth. Christ history at the time of his crucifixion and at the time of his last breath, as perhaps did you read, there was at that time a large lightning over the earth and shake the entire earth. Each of you called to be the way, the truth, and the life, and revealing this bliss, creates the whole earth, and not just by proximity during your chance meetings or your organized meetings, will be realized. You will see in the same way that joy has appeared in some brothers and sisters who were the last, who were interested to anything related to energy, consciousness, and vibration, but were in the spontaneity the heart, are best able to live it. Those of you who live both joy and both the vibratory process of perception, are also able to live, as you described, bliss of times more intense and more expansive. Thus all cosmic events of the intergalactic confederation, planets, satellites, the sun, and all of creation, is ready and just waiting for the opening of this beatitude, performed by a number always bigger brothers and sisters. Bliss, I repeat, does not depend on you, not of a posture or a year, but only a total surrender to the sacrifice. Bliss is just behind. Whatever description I could do different vibrales structures of eternity body or body interface eternity with the body of flesh, that is to say the interdimensional Merkaba, you have the option, as soon as you let go, as soon as you welcome, from the moment you are available to get in that state of bliss. But not when you decide. That is to say, do not try to go through this at some point you have chosen. Instead, try to live the quiet time, vis-a-vis availability of what takes place in you, that is to say close to some extent. The moment you allow for brief moments, and independently pulses of light, silence, meditation, whether at home, in bed, in nature, meeting other brothers and sisters, so will see more and more sensitive than this beatitude is there. It will fall to you from above against the punch, in the moments when you are not in the person, which actually corresponds to the state of sleep, the morning upon waking, or else the evening by putting you in extended position. I remind you that in relation to this you can anticipate nothing, you can trigger anything for yourself. It is the intelligence of the light that realizes. It is the intelligence of the light that embodies it. You are absolutely there for nothing, in this character, of this world as this story. But having made your eternity junction, for a growing number of brothers and sisters, with ordinary consciousness, helped reunite consciousness, the different fragments, as I said, and these fragments are finally reunite and letting the light in whole, without anything in your personal residual structure able to oppose that, whatever the state of your body, regardless of the state of your mind. This process is therefore called bliss, since you need names to identify you, is multifaceted. I cannot tell you the countless manifestations of this beatitude, as it follows, by cons, is always the same. Bliss ends definitively to any idea or thought to be a person of be a soul, or being a mind. Bliss is much more than ecstasy. It is, I would say, a completion form, a form of completeness, and again, bliss is an inner state that is substantially different from joy. It may seem like an extension, but it is primarily a state that is both fullness and emptiness, which is both everything and nothing, which is both being and non-being in their alchemy terminal. The important thing is not the intensity or duration of bliss, the important thing is that a sufficient number of brothers and sisters live or have lived this beatitude, even if the latter is not installed in permanently. Bliss cannot be accompanied by visions of bliss, cannot be accompanied by projections. It may be accompanied, for those who are susceptible, vibratory process we have discussed, but this is not essential. What is observed is mainly the result, is to say, the feeling of being so vast that you are infinite, the impression of being so focused that you are even a point. And all this in the same field of experience to direct your consciousness, without the intervention of visual mechanisms, or any projection of consciousness. Joy becomes her permanent marker of love. Bliss is the marker of the final phase of individual and collective ascension. It is in this sense that I said in the introduction that there is no more time that takes. All played spontaneously. I mean by this that it only remains to play in rewinding, the final scene. The final scene is not what you see gives this world in its process of destruction, in its process of elementary actions. This corresponds only to the person. But the process of bliss is directly coupled to the final ascent, terminal, and completing the cycle of the myth of creation. At that time, you are not only released, but you can never be fooled, even within this world, through this body, of any history, of any scenario or any projection. You are then available in full for what is to live. For some time, I said firmly that you were not at the time of Ananda Mahima, and you do not have to spend months or years in ecstasy or bliss, that it was necessary to assume the ephemeral. The intelligence of light today, you said, and begins to tell you exactly the opposite of what I told you. That is to say that bliss will eat literally all areas of the ephemeral, not only in history, but also in your character and your life on this earth, while leaving the minimum. Not a living wage, but the minimum compared to your obligations terrestrial, say, ephemeral and illusory, and that you must nevertheless lead to an end. But at some point you will find that the bliss took all the time, all the spaces. Ananda Mahima could stay in that state of bliss sometimes for many years. I assure you, this beatitude then cannot last for years. I said that this was the final stage of the ignition and setting based on your personal interdimensional Merkaba, who will come to join the collective interdimensional Merkaba already created. Silence. Beloved, let us continue. Voice, everyone is a little stunned. Only the first strata of bliss. Laughter, even if it seems to sleep or you sleep, observe that it is a half sleep. You're like, one might say, between two waters. It's not quite asleep, as we had the opportunity to speak countless times, whether by mine own voice or other voice. Pre-stasis mechanisms settled when you listen to me or when you listen to others. There it is not a deep sleep, but on condition that I would describe actually, of two. Drowsiness, not turiya, which is not a dream, not deep sleep, which is not enlightenment, not supraconsciousness, but is, indeed, as I have had occasion to say, the reunification of the various fragments of consciousness with a consciousness, that is to say non-being. Hence, not only from joy, but actually, bliss. Participant, just one question in relation to the black screen. Beloved, the question is related to the black screen, right? So the first step is the white paradise. Even participant, no, I had the black screen. But you do not have to go through this first step. White paradise mingles with the black paradise. What I call the black paradise actually is not a paradise, since there is no form of expression, there is just bliss and the certainty that you are actually and concretely at home, in Dela any form as of any size. The non-being, so far, could be called the Parabrahman or the Absolute, and corresponded to the life of the wave of rising phase during the first quarter of 2012, leading many of to be released alive by the rising wave of life. Here, it is much more than freedom. It is your natural state. This is not something that results from a change, but it is the consequence of the change in its discount in the event. Bliss as joy gives you confidence and experience of who you are, partially or in full. Bliss leaves no doubt. Because bliss delights you completely and leaves more space for any vision whatsoever. And in this case here, there is no vision white paradise. There is nothing to see. This is not black shade, which is not the absence of light, but what is the matrix of light, and yet the matrix is badly. What is the initial pulse of light, which creates the light? This is exactly bliss. Voice, there was a sequel to. So I listen to now. Next, yes, we had the black screen with a white dot that was forming, white point tends to disappear, but now I have a purple dot. What does it mean? That does not mean much. The white point may simply be the vision of the crown of the head, through some stars that are actually lights, which tend to gather in front of the head. As I said, that's many months, which I refer you, there is no going back on it. But the black screen, white point is simply the focal point of your presence right now. And the question that comes is, if you see this black screen with this white and purple, and then, if it's you, observing and watching, who sees? The I Lord. Who is involved? Nor the white heaven, nor by the black is the alchemy of two whose resultant is bliss. The difference between the white point and the purple is simply a degree of vibration or energy, color here simply meaning the energy level that appears on the screen of your consciousness. White paradise is simple, everything is white. The black paradise, everything is black. And as there are junction and cohesion between being and non-being, or if you prefer between white and black paradise, you situate yourself at the interface, is the alchemy of the two that leads the absence of color, leading to bliss. The important thing is not what you see in bliss, because there is no vision, I repeat. In the ecstasy, there may be. There is nothing to see, except for those who perceive the vibrations, the intensity of the vibrations that occur in different ways, in your chest. Whether pulsation, breathing the heart at a rate 3 to 4 times, whether the perception of a black hole in the middle of the chest, whether the perception of upward crown, as we have seen, or the sacred lemniscate, or the triangle of the new Eucharist, moreover, it makes no difference. What is important is the result, not perception. Since happiness is beyond all perception. But that joy is installed, that all structures of your body forever present, you have the opportunity, despite the presence of the body of flesh, to live it, to see, to perceive, but also feel it. But the important thing is not there. The important thing is what you see after having lived this moment, or what time of bliss. At one point, in your experience, talk about screen, but I go back to the previous question about a night lived. In this process, which has a priori no end, how far will he stop? As you said, it should be understood that it is the changes that are observed, whatever the shape, come this experience and this state, that you discover that, beyond the experience and condition, you are profoundly different. All those who have read or approached some mystics who lived these blissful states have noted the influence of their radiation, even when these beings are dead. He arrived. You may go to the tomb of a great man. You see, of course, that love is still there. Yet consciousness is gone. Because indeed, as the incorruptibility of the flesh to certain saints known in the West, whether in the Roman world and especially in the Orthodox world, is a reality. The material is transfigured. Transubstantiation is accompanied by an emanation of pure light whose effect is no longer just an immediate contagion or remotely, by phone or by appointment, but happens, I tell you, effectively and concretely over the earth. For those of you, however, who are curious, I invite you, in the beginning, now, because after you will be too many, to check if it is lived by you, it's is produced when you've lived, not you, but to the world. You will have surprises. I tell you this, because again, it is for you to check it, understand it after found. Often it was said, figuratively speaking, when the wing of a butterfly breaks as the whole universe trembles. I tell you today that when a brother or sister ecstasy key and saw bliss, the whole world is a beneficiary. You will find so surprised at the precise moment when you experienced this bliss, or that deep ecstasy that comes close, simply watching the clock and see then, to seek, what is the event that is produced at the earth elements, because it is your beatitude that achieves, by the intelligence of the light and not by your will. Connecting with ether, and through the Christ matrix that has taken the place of the binary matrix, makes this possible. What is experienced in a point of this earth is reflected in all consciousness of earth. So obviously, this observation is possible, because the moment you see it, the number will grow extremely fast, brothers and sisters who live this beatitude. And then it will be impossible to discern what is related to the state of bliss you touched and experienced, because there will be countless. But for now, you can check it for yourself. Your beatitude, your joy, your ecstasy, your joy that was contagious, now has an action directly on the elements. You have become your turn master ether. The master of the ether is not a master, in the sense that you could hear it. That is to say that your understanding of light that you are beyond form, really acts on this world and all of creation, in a second time. It started here too a few days ago. This will deploy, amplify, more and more each day. Do what you have to say is over? Yes. So we can proceed. Silence. Participant, I can just say a supplement over the testimony. I did. It is true that now we put a word, a name on this thing. But when it happens, I do not know what it is. So, obviously, I cannot know the consequences. It is true that it seems huge, it seems to me. It's not even me that it is somewhere. Voice, our sister added a sequel to his testimony by saying that we just put a word about what she saw, but knowing not, until now, she wondered, what it could well being and then what connection there may be with the rest, if there were consequences. She never imagined that there could be consequences. Oh, there are consequences, I've told you, on all elements of the planet. I believe now, but... Voice, she believed, she now believes. Simply check for yourself if it happens again, and it will happen again. Note well now, if you've the opportunity. And checks after it happened at that time, you'll see. In the same way that some of us, a few months ago, worked in multidimensional awareness and multi-localized on Earth, different provable and measurable ways, the same way today, but remain in you, in the reunification of all the fragments of your conscience, you then accessed for the purpose of this ecstasy and bliss, but the action, of course, does not concern you only. It is in this sense, as I said, when happiness has touched an unknown but sufficient number of brothers and sisters, then it will be officially recorded. White paradise will be there, together. Remember though that you cannot slow down or speed up the process. Again, even if you only lived once and you do not relieve, what is important is not the stability or the immutability of this beatitude, but the fact that you have lived. Just a sufficient number of brothers have lived, not necessarily synchronously or simultaneously or cumulatively, for the process, this time, the firing of the collective interdimensional Merkaba, be done. Anyway, once experienced this bliss, which can also remain, but most often, it simply give way to joy and ecstasy sometimes. The permanent bliss totally consumes the illusion. But you cannot precede the collective moment. Unless of course there is the level of your person, the necessary elements for your departure. But that does not mean the end for you, but the end for everyone. This is the collective time, it is the clash of humanity. And all this will be synchronous with what I said, the war of all against all, as had been said by others, but also of eternal bliss. The difference also, having lived the beatitude, that it sets in, disappears, comes back or not, it is a form of refining is done, your joy. It actually becomes more and more refined, more clear, and more palpable, so to speak. Beloved, do you have other things to say about this? No. If it happened to me several times. Voice, if this happened to him several times. I have told you, this is different for everyone. Some will live once, but the effects will be the same. Some will see repeated these beatitude states. And again, you had to see if you have lived many times, is that despite this beatitude, you have found that there are times when the person apparently takes orders. It's normal. This is the game that ends between what you are in truth, and what you thought was. And it actually goes through swings, but that cannot lead, I would say, disappearance of what has been lived. And thus a form of permanence, at least, peace and serenity, and most often, a silent joy. Silence. Voice, a question looming. We listen. Participant, when you speak of bliss, do bliss also permeates the material? Voice, when you speak of bliss, do bliss also permeates the material? Of course. It's not just about the items, but on the atom. Just see, in all cultures, you have what was called the cult of relics, saints, characters who have experienced something, and of course, the objects, their graves, their bodies, yet dead, keep it. Obviously that bliss, without going into details of physical and alchemical, causes a change in the structure of primordial matter. And leads, if I use a term a little different, a program configuration of your form. But of course, bliss permeates clothing, permeates the scene. It not only prints the opening to joy, brothers and sisters, but it touches, as you rightly said, the material itself, in its most inanimate aspects. Thank you. Many of you perhaps have during your travels, or wanderings whatever they are, have gone on the holy places which have had characters named saints. They died, but the radiance of bliss, or ecstasy, or joy, is still present. So the material, not just space, is actually steeped in this bliss. It is in this sense that the more you are likely to live, even if not simultaneously, more unmasking process last truth elements will be acute. But it's not up to you either. It is the intelligence of the light. The difference for you, of course, is that if you live several times that bliss, it'll be more intense and more efficient, if I can say, in all areas of your lives. But, you only live once, and for the earth is covered. This will leave again. This is the big difference compared to joy and compared to ecstasy. Bliss concerns both consciousness, but as you said, material, and therefore the body. Silence. Voice, our brother, thank you. And I have another question. Voice, there is another question. I'm listening to you. In fact, here, yesterday I am here with you all, and I shared. I get full of love, I feel the other, I feel myself, I feel multiple, unlimited, and I also know it, now it also permeates matter. Voice, so our brother says he is there with us, and it feels. I feel the energies of everyone. Voice, he feels the energies of everyone. While the same time I feel mine. Voice, and by feeling his, I feel unlimited. Voice, it feels unlimited. I see things, plans. Voice, he sees things, plans. Even the nature of the objects. Voice, even the nature, objects. Here. Voice, and I wanted to know if it was the way the beatitude. Voice, he wanted to know if it was the way the beatitude to bliss. This is unity. It's the ultimate presence, infinite presence is joy, and this is also what I would call the eyes that have D-cells. I did not send you, either, that would be too complex, some pipes no eyes on vision. What you see is unity. You see the etheric field and the causal texture, rather than the appearance of the material. Obviously, this is also a form of approach to bliss. But I remind you that in bliss, which occurs out of the blue, there is no longer any vision whatsoever. But what you saw there, corresponds to the potential appointed spiritual stars, at the head, are made according to these new bodies, and this new spiritual potential that gives you to see and experience everything you describe. In other words, bliss, this is nothing but an enjoyment of the heart. We are here not far from what you could name, for those who know, sacred sexuality. Where the act is not experienced in the organs, but at the heart, even if the organs are a junction point. So there is a love that allows it in you. All this gives you the certainty of the invisible, and obviously that way, helps prepare somehow build, like I said, access to the bliss. By making a pun, and especially for our sister before, who lived several beatitudes, and I think that we can confirm is that once you have experienced it once or a few times, you aspire to one thing, even without seeking, is to remain all the time. Ah yes. To laugh. In this voice, it confirms. It cannot be any other alternative. But it's true that when you speak of sacred sexuality, but it's true, it's something that I felt like. Well, it has nothing to do with human sexuality, but it's more than that. What? This is huge. Well, that's huge. It does not end, it has no limit, it seems to have no beginning or end. Because there is no longer any mark, linked to the form, related to the history, or related to any world whatsoever. But you confirm, and actually this is the case. You only live once, you do not aspire to it. And it makes you intention towards abandoning such Hildegard of Bingen you had described. And all potential related to this, access to the most pure information, and the life of Hildegard of Bingen has been shown. But now the purpose is not to convey something, the aim is to complete the story of creation. But actually, I would say somewhere that bliss is more addictive than joy. Laughter. But it is an addiction that wishes you well. Laughter. For once. Laughter. Silence. Pursuing. The ecstasy and bliss, it's the same thing? Not quite. The effects are profoundly different, the environment, since the bliss touches all subjects, all consciences. Joy is intended to touch consciences, but joy will never touch the subject. Joy is independent of matter. Bliss is somehow complement and completion of joy and ecstasy. As for the bliss, nothing can be said. Because, as you say so, it is so vast, it's so endless and without beginning, is so huge that it cannot enter into any frame of reference, in any view, in any scenario as in any world. And yet you saw. Silence. Beloved, let us continue. Silence. Voice, everyone smiles. Laughter. ABBA also. Laughter. Voice, a question. Participant, this is a question about something I lived there very long, so it is not necessarily to do with. I wanted to know. For example, I found myself once again to listen to music, and in fact, everything has grown inside me and I became the rope that was vibrating, sound, wood, in fact, I became that. And I was not at all me. Small laugh, and I experienced the same thing with a blade of grass that I bent again and I became a blade of grass, and I was breathing all around me, and I totally absent, what? Me. Finally, I was not me, that's it. I had room for everything vibrated, finally, all that was vibrant, but I was not there. Voice, should I repeat? Not at all. Thank you for what you expressed. Of course, you can be any other. The blade of grass, Sun, Orion, Sirius, you can be a mother geneticist, you can be the Christ. On the theater screen, on the screen of creation, you are all really and concretely. The end of the primary abnormality has allowed a growing number of brothers and sisters, beyond the processes experienced during 2011 concerning the merger process, communion, dissolution of consciousness and relocation of consciousness. Because in conscientious relocation process, you were somewhere else, but you still consciousness that you were that person. What you describe here is a little more advanced, so to speak, and different. That is to say that you really and concretely become the piece of wood, rope, blade of grass, the universe. Without any difficulty. And indeed, as you said, in this case one cannot talk of relocation of consciousness but, I would say, reunification of consciousness. Because there is actually a consciousness and a single. Find this reflects again the completion of confinement and completing the dream of creation. So you through what you went through, had proof that 1, you were not this body, but 2, you were not this story, because you could be the story of the rope, you could be the story of the wood, the story of the blade of grass. The first step is the identification, which is real, the blade of grass or piece of wood. And as you said, after you become the string that vibrates, you become the blade of grass that vibrates. And you really are, and concretely. And there is not a relocation, it is the unification and unity. This is the time when all the fragments of consciousness, as I have explained in the last retreat, in ABBA 5 or 6, which will bring you definite proof that consciousness is free. And that's it, that freedom of conscience, the fact of not being awarded a fixed manner and attached to a form or vehicle, which inevitably leads to a consciousness. All your experiences of each other, for several months now, but in the days that are there, that you live, to come. That is to say that anything is bearable, except of course the creation that was hidden, and because all the rest has been explained to you. So you sort a database, which is not there to take you in the past, which is not there to make you think, but are somehow witness of what you spend. As I said, we must live it, and it is not prohibited to include the following. Now all the elements of understanding, even if I answer your questions, have already been given. But we reactualize them to the light of what is happening on earth. But it's the same thing. Thank you. Voice, she thanks you. Silence. Beloved, let us continue. Voice, there are still 10 to 15 minutes, so we can. Then we can either take a last testimony or a last question, always, if you wish, in relation to the elements may not understand about ecstasy, joy, bliss, or possibly even on the structures of the body eternity I spoke, without going into too much detail. But we have the opportunity for those who would ask questions about new terms, Marian channel wave of life, and so on. And again, the explanations are not intended to make you live anything but accompany as witnesses, tags, your experience. Even if it is spontaneous, even if it is natural, as long as you are still an embodied character to the surface of this world, it is important that this character is also, somewhere, fed by the explanations. Not to feed the mind, but to feed the certainty of your experiences and your experiences. Silence. Was there a witness or a question, or? Voice, no, not for now. Voice, oh, there is someone who raises his hand. Let's listen. Participant, is there a difference between the wave of life and Kundalini? Beloved, I'll stay, if you want good, very brief in my answer. Kundalini is related to predation forces. As soon as there was previously a Kundalini awakening, an entity called Archontic was pressing against his back and remained there. The wave of life from under the feet. It consists of 3 parts. I will achieve it, it was explained. But in any case, the wave of life has nothing to do with the Kundalini energy. Although the wave of life, arriving at door's precision and depth and joins the 4-door posterior sacral, actually passes through the middle channel of the spine, which if I remember correctly, was called in India Sushumna, that has been replaced here many years by the descent of the Holy Spirit through the ether canal. Since inside the ether there is merely the Sushumna, Ida, and Pingala, but, above all, during the descent of the energy light from Sirius, the blue radiation from Sirius, the Holy Spirit, which impacted the upper chakras, which has fallen as the years, this time at the collective level, in all Sushumna, all human consciousness, achieved replacing the Sushumna by a channel ether. What was in that time in what was called Kundalini awakening by the wave of life is not the Kundalini energy, is the energy of the ether, which is linked to the wave of life, which is itself linked to the crystalline core of the earth, which was released. There is no overlay. The awakening of Kundalini, deemed dangerous, not driving you to live the Luciferian illusion. The ether canal cleared, so to speak, by the descent of the Holy Spirit, the various structures related to predation and which enclosed the sheaths of the chakras on the back of the body. From the moment the wave of life was born and joined the sacrum, which is mounted, is not the Kundalini energy, but I've told you, the energy of the ether, in the ether channel. This is what serves as a kind of reinforcement after the reunification of the 3-in-1, that is to say the crown of the head, the crown of the heart and the sacrum. The preliminary work of descent of the Holy Spirit lasted over 33 years, we are exactly at the 34th year, and allowed to line the canal ether, to prepare the rise of the wave life, many years later, by lining ducts and opening the chakras on the back in a downward direction, the descent of the Holy Spirit, not blocked at the third eye, but to the sacrum, lining and opening the is the story of the chakras. This is what has been achieved initial way by what has been named the 12 steps of celestial marriage during 2009. This means that the release by the wave of life may leave no opportunity for archontic strengths you to ride or own you, unlike the awakening of the Kundalini. The clairvoyants who see not only the astral, causal but perfectly describe this. Behind each brother or sister who has awakened Kundalini without having lived the descent of the Holy Spirit, there was once an entity that was plated archontic and constantly back and rode the soul of the person. Obviously this was the case before 2012 and was constant for millennia. Besides, the incarnate Nisargadatta said it himself, "Flee the world of the chakras, flee the world of energy, flee the world of the Kundalini, flee the world of channels, flee the world of all that is not the ultimate." Obviously the words of that time could not be implemented. They are acted upon today. The Kundalini awakening has nothing to do with the true light, the very fact of confinement and primary anomaly. Things are vastly different now because the ether canal was punctured for 30 years and that today circulates freely the energy of primordial ether of Mary from the crystal fountain, the center of 7th chakra, the triangle of earth at the back of the head, Kristi point in the back, and 4 ports located at the sacrum that resonate in communication, and at that time, you have actually met the 3 in 1. And you realize what was appointed the new Eucharist from Christ, Mary, and Michael. Do not see entities, but rather see it now forces to action. Do you have any other additions to ask in relation to this fundamental difference between the wave of life and Kundalini? Participant: well, it was a question I asked myself because I was not aware of it when started, if you want, energy surges in 2015. And we talked about Kundalini, we talked wave life. Ultimately I did not know at all what I had, what was happening in me. That's why I asked the question, because this is certainly not the Kundalini. Now this is relative, since the archons are equally enjoyed the brothers and sisters embodied humans, and given the presence of precisely the primordial ether, or the first ether, over the end of the anomaly primary, now even those who were written by archontic entities associated with the awakening of the Kundalini are clear of this, the ether channel, the adamantine particles, simply. I am relieved. Laughter. The fire of Kundalini has been called, in the tradition, the serpent fire or fire by friction, coincidentally. The ether fire or fire igneous, not at all the same effects or the same implications or the same results. Silence. Voice: we have 7 minutes or so. No questions, for now. Are there any final elements to say today? I propose for our next talks from tomorrow to formulate questions also in writing, and we will also matters coming of brothers and sisters who are not present, too. Be aware that every time you ask a question or you show, you resonate all who live the same as you, and everywhere else. The important, as you said, is not so much to understand, but to recognize. Recognize is not an understanding. Recognize gives a point not to compare, but a common point. Do you recognize yourself as a human, because you have the same constitution, regardless of your skin color, whatever your age, whatever your crops. There are anatomical abnormalities, anatomical differences rather, as peoples and cultures, of course. But basically it's the same material. Today you are not only interconnected, interrelated, but you learn through everything that was said today, through your testimony that really and concretely, we are all, each in the other. And it cannot be otherwise. This is the principle of creation, in which the binder is love. A binder for liberation which prevents confinement. Beloved, it will be time now to bring us blessing and shared common home. ABBA gives thanks to your presence, your words, our exchanges. Silence. Beloved, I therefore you tomorrow, and forever. Goodbye. Thank you. Cough.